Thank you very much for this invitation. Hey Boomer, we called this session and we asked whether we are thinking seriously about the relaxation of tensions between generations or the conflict between generations. And I'm happy to talk to this about representatives of different age groups. In the first part, it's about the question whether it makes sense to talk about generations. It's came up with in many discussions in the past few years. There's many voices that doesn't make sense. It's about it's more than astrology than anything else, and we have to think about this and talk about this. And I will explain how I talk about generations and how I use the term generations. We do the trend study Youth in Germany. We did many other studies in the past and asked ourselves how is the youth compared to the older population. And in this study, we talked to all age groups: under 30-year-olds, 30 to 59-year-olds, and over 60-year-olds. And the question is, can we find differences in these generations, and can we find tensions in these generations? And I will draw some conclusions out of that, and then we will go to that discussion. The term generation, it's used in marketing, it's exploited, it's debated. You might even get afraid of the level of exploitation in marketing. It's sometimes taken too literally, too visibly. The idea is like every 15 years, the new generation is born. How does this happen? It's quite serious. It's an idea of the Karl Mannheim from the 1920s, a generation researcher. And the basic idea is that it's quite wonderful. And I oriented myself towards that. The younger generation in its age between the formative years of the puberty and the age of 22, 23, 24, between 12 and 22 maybe, takes up all impulses from the environment in such an intensity in a way that it isn't usual in the previous or later ages. And that informs the social character, and that makes people very similar because they experience similar events in the same way: cultural, technical, social changes, and this especially the Auseinandersetzung. The debate, no, not really debate, but it's about the relation of body and psyche, and living in the world and positioning your body and psyche in the world, and that is a very intense processing of reality, and it's being picked up in the most intense way, and that informs a certain character. It's whether it keeps for whether we do this for our entire life is a different question, but to investigate this and put this into the term generation, present this in that way, I think that is very useful. So we come to the term, so that's how the term comes together. And that's why you distinguish between different age groups, age cohorts. There's this generational term from age cohorts, the baby boomers. They were born 1950 till 1965. The Generation X, then the millennials, and then from 1980 to 1995, the Generation Z till from 1995. Since 2010, we have Generation Alpha, and they're artificial terms. It's a little flimsy. It's it's a little artificial to just make this cut. To just put a mechanical grid of time on top of these age groups and find common grounds, common characteristics, and finding you can do that, but I've done this. I can defend that, but the argumentation is obviously true that the new generation isn't born on the 1st of January 2010, because we just have this 15 years grid. And especially we just want to make this cut at that point. We have a second generational term that I also find interesting. That's the dissemination between age groups, but between phases of life. I'm just saying, there's like a new living situation every 15 years, and a new cohort. But the question is, like, in which phase of life am I? And am I in the beginning phase? Am I in the middle phase? Am I in the late phase? And figuring out which are the differences that emerge from the perspective of life. I walk through life in very different assumptions or approach. When I'm under 30, I have to I have to build up my life. I have to get educated, etc. When I'm in my, in the middle phase, it's a very different phase, and then even different if I'm in my late phase. Corona was a good example.
Because the pandemic, it affected everyone. It meant for everyone that the daily rhythms didn't work anymore, that existential fears are there. But all studies we have, they show that the people in the first part of their life, the under 30s, the pandemic was a much bigger burden than all others, because they are just building up their own life. They are creating a life. They have to find a perception of their own psyche and body and everything, because they're interacting much more intensely with everything, and that's just a bigger burden than in a higher age. And in studies that focus on this, there's the twin study in Germany. We do that every year. Every 2 years, it's also comparing generations, comparing different age groups. It showed that such happening as the pandemic was handled differently by different generations. And what we still see is that psychological fear and burdens and depression and feel of helplessness and feeling of loss of control, it's much higher in the younger generations than in the middle and older generation. So we can obviously see that the younger generation is more vulnerable, and by an extreme event they are much more affected. And until today, the traces are still visible on them. And it's a situation where the younger generation altogether has a higher burden, has more stress to handle, and has to work on their own living situation much more. What else do we know? Well, let's look at all the sectors one by one. Feelable differences when concerning work life. The younger generation, the under 30s, they are confronted with the claim that they are not as motivated when it comes to work as it's common in our society. So the baby boomers who are now leaving the workplace, that's a lot of people. There's a strong numbers. They want everything to continue how they build it up. They are the ones who know how it's done. They are the ones that mostly influence the structures and dominated the structures. They are above 55. They know how to handle power. They are in a situation of confrontation, and they grew up in it, and they know everything, and they know it well. And they can't imagine that a young generation that's coming in now wants to handle things differently from them. This younger generation, they mirror the corona pandemic and this feeling of living in a world where no stone is left unturned, where nothing can be calculated securely, where no one can tell how to continue tomorrow. And not only immaterial and psychological insecurity is big, but also material insecurity. And that's obvious to them, and that's what they proclaim. And they come with a strong feeling that they don't want to put their all into their job, that they want to be handled delicately. And they proclaim that people should take their personal situation into account. And they're called lazy. It's interpreted as laziness. And there's a lot of misunderstandings. And there's a huge potential for generational conflicts, and we have to think about this. So concerning education, a current study shows that there's a lot of tension as well. Young people are not happy with the quality of education, how the educational system works with the buildings and the quality of the work. There are a lot of teachers who are not up to with the times, and they have a feeling that the teachers who come from a different generation, they're not handling them intensely. There are positive examples, but they have an idea that they are in a system that does not prepare them to everyday life, and especially not to the workplace. And that's right, it's correct. The study shows that the preparation of already the apprenticeships, for example, is not enough. So they're not prepared to learn a job even. Many people who finish job have no idea what they are supposed to do after. So there's a lot of insecurity. The educational system does really not use the opportunities, and it's not not handling the wishes and opportunities of the younger generation well. And the younger generation feels neglected, and they don't feel treated fairly. Next topic, politics and trust in politics. The feeling that the politicians and the government, the governing people, there is fears because of the climate crisis, because of war, because of living conditions. There's the fear that the younger people cannot design their own lives because there is economical pressures. There is a lot of worries, and they don't want to really look into the future. And all the studies of the last years show that young people believe that those in political power are not attacking those topics. We have an enormous loss of trust in politics, and politics is mostly designed by the older generations. The parties hardly, and sometimes not at all, manage to really address the under 30-year-olds. At least the under 30-year-olds, they feel that their topics, the topics that are important to them, that are important to their lives, that those topics are not addressed by those in power as it would be necessary. And that leads to disappointment. And the last elections, it was kind of modest, but we already saw that the younger generations, they moved away from the parties of the middle and went into the extremes, to the left and to the right. The older generation stays in the middle and the center. And here we have also tensions between the generations. And we have to take this seriously and build bridges for a dialogue. And I also have to mention the digital transformation. It also has potential for generational tensions, quite obviously. It's the case that younger generation, the younger people, they interact intensely with the digital world, with social media and everything connected to it. Most people under 30 are only getting the information, the political information, from these channels, which also leads to established parties not reaching them anymore. And that's also different in the older generations. So there's a lot of tension in how and where you get your information. And connected with that, also a topic of this Congress here, the experience that young people make, that they are controlled by bigger companies. They are dependent on the TikToks and Instagrams of the world, but they have no participation. They just feel manipulated. They cannot influence the manipulation. And in society and education, in schools, they are not prepared properly to handle those offers, these social media offers properly. And I have to say, all studies that we have right now from the WHO, that the psychological burdens are quite visible, that's created by the unsovereign usage of social platforms. It depends on frequency and the intensity of usage, but we have to really worry here what it means for a digitally incompetent younger generation, because neither in school nor in other institutions we give the foundations that you would need to really handle this information flood. The last point we have is the material situation. Young people, they worry about inflation. They know that they have no control over their own living situation. They have to work more. They don't believe that the pension system will work for them. They worry about living quarters. They are worrying about debt. A lot of people are in debt because they have no competences on how to move in the financial area. They are unhappy with the pension politics and structure. They help the older people, but they themselves feel that they are disadvantaged. So we have a starting situation where we have to say the younger generation is carrying the burden of a badly organized society, badly organized when it comes to work, to education, to material safety, to digital transformation. In all sectors, it's the young generation that's expected to just handle everything just as it is. And in all situations, in all fields, the young people have a feeling that they are not taken seriously, that they are discriminated against sometimes. And in all situations, there's an estrangement. So putting all together, the worries are that their worries are not taken seriously, their fears are not taken seriously, it's not accepted that they have it difficult, and that in a time where they're thinking very politically and feel very politically active. So I think here we have a real challenge to the older generations to really handle this, and also a challenge to politics. And that's also my findings that I want to put together briefly again. First, we have to think about how can this, and I would say justified feeling of the young generation, how can we handle that? How can we handle that they feel unheard? What possibilities exist to represent them in a political spectrum? How can it work that in election time the topics are talked about that the young generation cares about, and not just the big mass of voters who are above 40 or 50 years old? How can parties be made to also care about the younger people? And I think here we need new ways of thinking. We need a new kind of discussion. How would it be with an institutionalized board of youngsters in the parliaments? How maybe we have to think about quotas for young people, how we think about quotas for women. How about digital forms of participation that would work well for young people? How about lowering the voting age to 16 or 14 maybe, to give them a chance to participate? Well, all in all, we would need the parties who are carrying the political education. We would also need them as a function of generational bridge, as a forum for a dialogue between generations, and they are hardly doing that. And that can be a high risk for the further development of democratic culture and structures in Germany. The second point I would connect to the resources. The study that I referred to showed that young people are disadvantaged when it comes to resources. They don't have the same opportunities. They don't have the opportunities that they need. They don't have the options that they deserve. They need a material security, a security that enables them to jump from education, from school, into the work life. They have a challenge that they cannot pay for their living locations, that they don't get long-term contracts, that they don't have any hopes of getting a pension. So the challenge that we see connected to the question whether we have to change taxes maybe, if we have to think about taxes on just capital, if we have to change education system and to change this education system and the situation of the younger generation. And lastly, thirdly, the political education as such. We need a fundamental opportunity in school, but also in civil organizations, to get the feeling that I belong with there and my voice counts, I'm integrated. And we need a good education in schools. We need good lesson plans. And maybe we already need kindergartens as a lab for democracy. We need a democratization of the structures in schools, so that in schools, young people get the founded feeling that this is my spot. Here I can participate. I have opportunities to decide for myself. And here I have opportunities to really change something. Do we have a generational conflict? Do we have enough generational responsibility? I would say, while a lot of the middle and older groups of the society live in stable conditions, a bigger part of the younger generation fights difficult working conditions, and their health is also a good sign. So the bad health is a good sign that we are in trouble. There's never been a time where a whole younger group was so weak in their health, mental and physically, as the younger generation now in the last 10 to 15 years. And it's a very obvious warning sign. It's a symptom for them to be disadvantaged structurally. A real generational conflict grows from this if the understanding for each other is not there anymore. Empathy and responsibility for each other. We do not have that situation right now, and the trend study shows this quite clearly. The bridge between the generations is still there. The youngsters are acting solidarily, and the oldest are not saying no. But what we need is a new debate, a new generational contract. The older people enable the future of the youngsters, and the young people bring the innovation force to make the society crisis-proof and develop it further. That would be my dream. We are far from it. The study that I showed you and my thoughts on it, they show that we have to be careful. I think we are on an unstable point, and the political situation and the health situation of the younger generation shows this quite obviously. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Klaus. And this generation dialogue we want to lead right now. And I want to invite to the stage Anna Lahamba. She's editor at TinCon with focusing on moderator for generational conflicts and social media competence. Great applause for her. Anna has worked on journalistic educational project intergenerationally and is also a musician. I want to also invite Arjun Ilta. He's the head of the student state commission of the land of Berlin. And I want to Gaia Paner. She's from Berlin-Kreuzberg, did her education in the Netherlands and moved back to Berlin and is interested in something else and film. We have a lot to unpack. We listened to Klaus and his talk. I wanted to hear where do you find yourself and where do you find yourself, where do you see yourself seen? The political load I heard from Klaus and the tension in the society is on one side, but there's also we're lacking the spaces to discuss this. People leave school without a real discussion about climate justice, digital ethics, or generational contracts. And the thinking about performance and that's much more present. Do you feel yourself seen, picked up there, or is that your life reality? I would say yes. That's in context of school is the big problem. As a student, it's maths, German, and English, and that's the challenge. Where we have to ask ourselves, how do we treat democracy, and how can we bring democracy to the young people and politics? The class doesn't help. We have school. We have the Ukraine conflict, Middle Eastern conflict, White House, the guy in the White House, and we have these fears and concerns, and we need to talk about these, especially in talking about mental health, and especially our total situation. People are concerned, and the school can't catch these concerns. Where this school is so important, though, and people spend so much time there. If there's no possibility to pick up the entire situation and talk about it, then we have a big problem. We have big problems. Gaia, thank you. So, How do you see this? You've been to school in different countries. Would you see this? Where are spaces where there's political discourse? Was it the same at your school, or was it differently? Well, so you went to school in the Netherlands and in Germany. Is it the same there in the Netherlands, or was there lack of space for this political discourse and other societal topics? I was at many schools, and some schools it was better than at others. But there was some exchange, and some teachers were more open for this, and some weren't. And it was quite different. Do you find these spaces in a different way in the digital sphere, for example, or in other areas of life? For me, yes, but many of my co-students, most of them, didn't search for that apart from school, and didn't think about that much. So I'm also interested in you, Anna. You may not forget that you live in the digital bubbles that is defined by algorithms, and if you look at comment sections, you have to get the feeling that you can't find any common ground anymore, and that's a big problem, a big difficult aspect, because these commonalities aren't existent anymore. And apart from the digital sphere, there's also analog space lacking. I want to get back to the main topic. When we talked about the topic for Republica, we thought we might hit the nail on the head. But the generational conflict is the least big problem, Klaus, for you. But what are the main topics for you? Was it surprising that generation conflict doesn't play such a big role? It was quite weird, because if you let that work on you, you asked the younger generation, the 14 to 29-year-olds, 30 to 59-year-olds, and the over 60-year-olds, the orientation towards values, is almost identical. Family, friends, it's the entire approach to life. There's against all odds, all prejudice. It's the absolute same between all large generations. All the values, virtues are the same. Some is little different, but generally it's the same. But there's a lot of commonalities, and that lets us hope. There's no rifts between the different age cohorts, but I searched for these tensions. Where's the sparks of tension? Where might be, bigger conflicts arising, and there's quite a few, but we have to talk about these exact conflicts, and we've got to think about how to fix them. The symptom of young people being psychologically and mentally and physiologically challenged in their age, that's a big problem. That's that's a big issue, and very concerning. So the biggest conflict is not between the generations, it appears to me. The bigger rift is between young men and young women, or not representational on this panel maybe, but young men rather vote right, the young women vote left and green. There's different approach to, for example, mental health. And these big rifts exist between the generation Z and Alpha. Is the conflict rather between the generation, or I think we can attach ourselves to the idea that you move within your bubble, and there's a huge difference between the different bubbles in the same generation. There's definitely big differences, and for example, from the cosmos of TikTok, that you have trad wives on one side, then you have super feminist perspectives on the it's within the same generation, and you see this. And I would also agree that you have the same problem. You can see this from the school perspective. So the school has the school context has a socioeconomic background. This has a concrete influence on what kind of chances you have and contact possibilities, and when it's about certain topics. Some students have the possibilities, some don't. Some others some are in privileged situation, some aren't, and then there's a different views and on a political level as well that
in der Generation, also gerade in der Generation, hat einfach nicht ermöglicht.
That doesn't allow for this peace within my generation. And how do you want to say anything? Yeah, no. Okay. Okay.
Genau.
Klaus, what? This was also a point that you made in your talk, that young people move away from established systems and parties. And that was also one of the biggest divisive points. That's digital and the fear of digital, and therefore the some rift between some who consume established media and some are more on social media. And your study defined the right risk there. Can you go into there? So with about the different information sources, yes. So we have main informational source is for young people is only digital, and the main information source for over 30-year-olds is traditional media, traditional information channel. So now it's the question is how well set up these systems are. We have an established system of like public media and newspapers. It's quite transparent, but intransparent as news and information on most commercially run social media channels like TikTok and Instagram, and so I don't know what it's about. It's a secret algorithm, and it's not being made transparent. And I find this one of the biggest risks for democracy that needs this transparent and understandable way of informing yourself. And the younger generation finds structures that are impenetrable, and they are ununderstandable, and then people end up in a bubble and can't identify that they are in this bubble. So what are filter bubbles and what has been, wrongly categorize, it's a big topic. Like, for example, that certain media is categorized as a certain position. And that's the question is there actually a place for debate somewhere? And so the social media is the place where you consume political media most, right? I actually, interestingly, read the newspaper from time to time. So I mostly consume social media, yes. It's mostly TikTok and Instagram. The primary sources for me and my friends and young people use, and they distribute political content. So that's my algorithm shows me news from Labour government in Great Britain, and other friends get shown news from neo-Nazis. And that's a big difference, especially in social media. And the behavior in social media is super important. There's a basic difference between within digital media, I can start the debate. The prohibition of using phones in school. Teachers want to forbid them. Students want to use them. There needs to be a clash. There needs to be but they need to come together, and a blanket ban doesn't bring anything, but an understanding, is much better. So an understanding that what you are consuming, then what you are consuming isn't the only truth. So we will have this debate with our Minister of Education as well tomorrow, Anna Gaia. So the new cabinet is full of younger people. Now where in the study people agreed that they are fed up with the government, unhappy with the government. So now we have in the new cabinet we have very young ministers. Do you think that young people can be picked up in that way? I think that it can be spoken to, be reached if young people are in the cabinet, but it's important that it's not only young people are there, but at least there's some, and that the generation is reflected there. Anna? So politics, despair, it sounds like it's so negative. The politic it implies that people are evil. That it implies that politicians are evil, or bad. But it's important that politicians convey emotional safety, for example. And I would like to see this. And that brings to the point. I think I have the feeling that you can't get through to the people, and that's where the loss of trust happens.
Of course, we have new people now in the new cabinet, also young people, but I want to mention another example, especially the new contract between the parties never mentioned education. It's only counted under finances. So we have broken schools. We need more money in schools and digital. And it can be talked about with Karen Prim. But the big problem is that this topic is not real content of the work of the next government, especially the interests of the young people that they have every day needs to be worked on by the new government, and that also needs to be mentioned in the contract between the parties of the new government. And it's really a sad situation. And the question now is how much priority will young people have when it comes to difficult decisions? I also want to open it up to all your questions and comments. So there will be microphones in the audience, and there's a lot to discuss as well, and other generational voices maybe. We already talked a bit about digitization, but what I found interesting in the study as well, there are so many prejudices when it comes to Gen Z, silent quitting, that people are not really willing to put much effort into specific. So people just want to be famous on Instagram, become influencers maybe, but working in a normal office, they don't put as much effort into that. But you saw it differently, that people are willing, but they are also making demands on workplaces and so on. Yeah, so it's really interesting and obvious, especially those who achieved a good education. They have high demands. They want a workplace that really fits to you. And such unhumble things are mentioned. So your own situation, your private situation, your health situation, you want to be addressed personally. And all those are mentioned in any good management book. But now a whole young generation comes and demands it themselves. And in many big companies, it's misinterpreted. They are called lazy and they want it easy. And maybe in individual cases that is the case. But what we have is a very self-conscious young generation. And they should have good chances in a workforce because the big baby boomer generation is dropping out. Two drop out, one comes in. So the market force of the young people, it's improving. So I am curious how it's only the case in the workplace, because in politics, they still don't notice that society will not continue to work without young people. If we don't manage it now, then the established generations will not manage to win the young people. And we can learn a lot from the not self-conscious, but self-empowered act, how self-empowered the young people act. And I really hope that they can articulate it well, that they are here now and that they want to be heard and that they demand more. And it's really interesting that you are staying humble. Yeah, I also think it's a very nice development that work for the younger generation is maybe not, it's also the development of your own identity, to be creative. That is not just about making money and security, but also a foundation for identity. And it is self-care to say that I care about my mental health at work, and maybe I have a four-day work week because I want to work creatively as well. I would definitely agree. We have a big flexibility here, but in other areas we don't. So politics was already mentioned, school as well. Sadly, we see, especially when looking into the future, there are good opportunities, especially how to work differently. A lot of walls were moved, and that brings opportunities. Okay, looking at the time, we have to jump a little because there's a topic that is really important, I think. There are a few numbers in the study that were hard to swallow, and I think it was the same for you when you did this study, especially even if it's not a surprise in itself. So 64% of us people think that Germany is moving right. Half of them have a feeling that the state cares more about foreigners than their own people. And this is a quote. And that you cannot say anything against it, otherwise you are labeled a racist. And the sentence really stuck with me. It is a generation that really thinks right-wing extremism is cool. How did you feel when you were analyzing those numbers? And you already mentioned a few topics where you think where a lot of work is needed. So what could we do now to change the narrative of this generation? Yeah, this moving to the right, the right-wing, the extremely right-wing position, the authoritarian extremist positions, it's obvious. It also goes pretty far. So the polarization, on the one side, we have left-oriented, progressive, green, and young people who believe in the state as well, who imagine a certain society, but the other side gained a lot of strength. And right now, we have the stronger forces to the right. It largely is because of young men. It can be explained by young men, because they lost their role, their identity that could play a role. And that's just a reaction, because in their bubbles, there are a lot of strong women, and so they are reacting in the opposite direction. But it's, in my opinion, a really deep disappointment. And the AfD profits of this, of course, because they provide answers. They provide easy answers. Many people don't question those answers. And in the digital process, sometimes there's not really time because you react quickly. So what can we do? I am wondering how the other parties are not working digitally, that they learn how to address young people, how to bring political messages to a point, to put it briefly. But in the end, the only thing that helps is a government and a parties in a government that work transparently and that show that they care and they start a dialogue also with the younger people about the topics that the young people care about. There is no other recipe for me if we want to remain in democratic structures. So, any other ideas? I want to add that we have the big problem that if, for example, the party of AfD, that is obviously right, extremely right, that to complex questions the youth cares about, they give simple populistic answers and it works for many. And that's the problem. What I can see, especially in education, everything is cut. Anti-Semitism prevention. A lot of money was cut. The question that has to be asked, we have so many challenges. And not only right-wing extremism, we have the Middle East. How do we handle anti-Semitism in schools? Instead of giving offers and helping, nothing is done. Quite the opposite, actually. And that's the big challenge. If in the future we continue not doing anything, and young people are left alone in the internet, in the social media, then the challenge will only grow bigger. The AfD is just one side of the medal, but right-wing, extreme right-wing, small parties also work in schools. They are quite active in social media. They have so-called values, apparent values, but at their basis, they are against other humans and against our social democratic order here in Germany. And I think it's really important for everyone to understand, have a clear understanding of our democracy, for everyone to understand, yeah, I have the opportunity to change something. I can change something. In school, outside of school, a lot more offers have to be made. What's up with all the young people in the rural areas who have no offers for free time? And we have to really be careful that there is no pooling for right-wing, so for right-wing parties. And we have to do something quickly. This call to action, how it's called so nicely, nobody should miss it. Everyone should listen, because now is the time, and otherwise we're not having it anymore. So we'll open this up. Maybe you have questions or comments for our panel. Nice people with microphones are coming. You can wave, and then they are coming to you. There's none, then we'll just continue. There is one here in the front. Hey, Oliver from Baden-Württemberg. I don't know about the rural areas around Berlin, but we have a lot of sports offers. We have soccer, we have handball, we have a lot of youth work. Nobody was shot in school in our area, and so on. So I think there is too many offers. I think the rural area, I have a feeling that people are more easily caught than in the city where their subculture is building. Well, I think in our country there is very different realities. And in some areas it's like this, but in others it's different. But also very often it's a difference of the educational level and the background. Who can join in these offers, these sports, for example? Yeah, I want to add that especially when talking about right-wing extremism, a lot of students in the eastern part of the country, especially the states Brandenburg, Berlin, Saxony, Thüringen, where it's different, and young people mentioned that there is not many options. And I'm from the area of Reinickendorf in Berlin. And I have to say I didn't have many options, or I don't have many options. It's not just about free time, but it's also about participation, youth parliaments, and democratic structures in schools. And strengthening that, well, there is a lot of work, and they are quite weakened often. And it also depends on how much material is there in those locations. So it varies greatly.
Jetzt wollen wir vielleicht noch mal abschließend gucken. Your
Okay, maybe we want to say something. You are transitioning out as the youngest generation. So it's not only you carrying all these burdens. There is Generation Alpha as well. Apparently, there's already Generation Beta around us. So talking about generational conflicts, the following generations, and the expectations, the hopes. Yeah, maybe, Klaus, do you want to open the final round or close the final round? Are there any findings from your study, maybe, what the youth today, how it views the coming youth? Well, it's easy for me. The study shows that the most important points, participation for the young generation, wherever, in family, in the kindergarten, in the workplace, in schools, wherever they are, in public spaces. Real and true participation is what's important for young people. And actually, it's a very simple challenge that we face. What about you? I would say it's a generation where you can have a lot of hope, because it went through a lot of crises, but there's also a lot of opportunities because of digitization, and it's really important to work on commonalities and find together instead of thinking in groups. Any comments to that? Anything to add? Yeah, I would agree. And I also believe that right now a lot is happening all the time. And I noticed earlier that Generation Beta for us is what your generation, Generation X, is for us. So that's the same distance. And in between, a lot can and will happen. But I also have hope. And I hope that they can do good. Yeah, and we should improve things so a lot more can happen. What about you? I think there's a better togetherness, because otherwise, just like this, we can strengthen the commonalities within the society, and just that's the only options. Yeah, thank you again, and a big round of applause to all the panelists again.